I'm Orkhan Amashov. Welcome to Context. This week has so far been incredibly eventful, in fact historic in many ways, with some of its key developments revolving around the fate of Ukraine. And quite a lot is yet to happen, with analysts around the world contemplating the very big questions of our time and trying to make sense of what is to come. British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer is in Washington, D.C. to meet US President Donald Trump for what will be a reality check for the good old special relationship between these two nations, potentially revealing the extent to which the position maintained by the new Republican administration is amenable to the UK's Ukraine-informed outlook. At a time when a single stray sentence could rile the US president, the central question is how and by what means Britain will navigate this deeply intricate situation so as to protect its own interests and contribute positively to the fate of Ukraine. Before the meeting, Prime Minister Starmer reiterated the view centered around the construct that some European troops, including British units, leading what is known as a Joint Expeditionary Force with a US backstop, might be part of those security guarantees that would make Ukraine feel safe. On the other hand, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to sign what is known as a rare earth minerals agreement with the US, with a report suggesting that the original US request for $500 billion in revenues from using Ukraine's natural resources has now been dropped. In view of the substantial majority of these deposits being within Russia-controlled Ukrainian territories, there is an important question as to how the jurisdictional aspects of the issue will be tackled. Kyiv's major demand is security guarantees in return for the access granted. In fact, there seems to be a new consensus emerging as to the subject of Ukrainian sovereignty and the resolution of the conflict with Russia, with the US leading the charge in apparent defiance of its European allies, including the United Kingdom. On two separate occasions over this week, Washington sided with Moscow, first at the General Assembly and then at the Security Council of the United Nations. The UN drafted UN Security Council resolution on Ukraine without any criticism of Russia was adopted, with the UK and France abstaining. Questions have been asked as to whether, for all its limited content and incomplete nature, the US drafted resolution 2774 could actually form the basis of international legal settlement of the conflict. For after all, this is the very first document of its kind that has survived veto hurdle of the permanent members of the Security Council. But there are quite a number of things to discuss today, from the meeting of the British Prime Minister with US President to the minerals deal and some other related matters. Quite a lot to digest and unpack today. So I'm delighted to be joined by Viktor Rad, board member of the Ukrainian American Bar Association and chairman of the Committee of Foreign Affairs, with more than 35 years of experience as an international attorney, joining from New York, United States. Welcome, Mr. Rad.
Thank you very much.
Ambassador Andrei Baklanov, deputy head of the Association of Russian Diplomats, joining from Moscow, Russia. Welcome,
Hello.
Ambassador. And Ambassador Gustavo de Aristegui, former Spanish diplomat, scholar, author of a number of influential works on foreign policy issues. Ambassador Aristegui, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. My first question is to Mr. Rad. Mr. Rad, since beginning of the war in Ukraine 3 years ago, the Security Council has been practically deadlocked by the power of Russia, which is, as one of those 5 permanent members, entitled to veto any resolution there. Now we have a US drafted resolution adopted with 10 votes in favor, 5 abstentions, with a very neutral language, using the term Russian Federation-Ukraine conflict, as opposed to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, omitting reference to Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Its content is incredibly simple, and it mourns the tragic loss of their lives throughout the conflict, reiterates the principal purpose of the UN as maintaining international peace and security, peacefully settling disputes, and also calls for a swift end to the conflict, urging lasting peace between Ukraine and Russia. It does say nothing about the aggression, occupation, and so forth. Could we assume that this is a inception of a new international legal consensus on Ukraine and the conflict itself?
Well, an articulated, most recent statement of position, certainly by the United States. And I should add that the Russian Federation's even mere membership in the United Nations is illicit. There was never a vote of any admission. There is no concept of a state being a successor state as a member of the Security Council or even as a member of the United Nations generally. So Russia's presence alone, continuing blockage, veto power in the United Nations. So, that may sound like a footnote to your question, but it's really the overwhelming issue. My concern here is that the order, what we've gotten after the world wars in the 20th century, that the principles, the values, and the like that the United Nations represents, and that most people, I think, agree, have been reduced in the United States to money. And it is not much different than offering security, even though in this mineral agreement there is no offer of security. But it's no different than the Wagner Group offering security and extortion for mineral and other rights of the nations in Africa. So this is a very, very disturbing position for the United States, but it is not for, of course, for Russia. It is an astonishing reversal of many, many generations of so-called American diplomacy.
Ambassador Baklanov, Mr. Rudd talked about astonishing reversal. Through this week, indeed, a series of extraordinary developments have taken place, and the UN was the epicenter of those developments indeed. On two separate occasions, as I mentioned earlier, the United States sided with Russia in defiance of United Kingdom and France. And we also know that with regard to the UN Security Council resolution, when it was proposed by the United States, UK and France tried to amend its wording, and it was vetoed. And eventually it was adopted with 10 members voting in favor and 5 abstentions, with UK and France abstaining as well. So what is your reading of the situation? Because Russia's UN ambassador, Vasily Nebezhny, acknowledged this, he said, constructive changes in the US position. He said that it's not an ideal one, but also he said that it's a beginning leading to lasting peace. What is your reading of the situation? We are in the presence of some extraordinary developments.
Well, first of all, good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
Actually, we think that there is only one major and important development as far as the overall situation in Ukraine is concerned. This is the attempts of the Americans to play more, more important role. The role that will take into consideration the arguments that we are supplying to the American side. Well, we don't know what will be the prospects of these attempts, because it's very premature to speak about that. But what we have in the United Nations, this is just the manifestation of this new role the Americans are trying for themselves. But the majority of the specialists in Moscow are very skeptical about the final account of this round of talks in the UN, and they think that perhaps the usual procedure will prevail. With the Western countries unite and have a negative attitude to the Russian understanding of the basis of the events developing in the Ukraine. So I'm rather skeptical about the opportunities of having some some results at this juncture.
Ambassador Baklanov is very skeptical, and he himself skeptical, and also saying that those analysts based in Moscow are skeptical about the prospects of what's taking place now. But still, back to that UN resolution, I would like to conclude the conversation about that Security Council resolution. What is your evaluation of the current situation? It looks absolutely extraordinary to many people. As a professional diplomat, geopolitologist, do you remember any case, any instance of US siding with Russia or Soviet Union against the United Kingdom and France?
No, I don't. Definitely not. Not even after the Cold War was over in 1990. I do think that there are some extremely troubling signs of some very deep geopolitical changes, geopolitical strategic changes, because a lot of people are saying that they are dictated by realpolitik. And realpolitik has to be dominated, or has to be presided by morality and by ethics. Principles and values must preside over international relations. And the reason why geopolitics and geostrategy are in a higher echelon than geoeconomics or the economy, it's because the economy and geoeconomics have to be submitted and have to be subordinate to geopolitics and geostrategy, because that's peace and security, stability for the world, and that is Chapter 7 of the United Nations. Anything that endangers peace, security, and stability in the world goes against Chapter 7 of the United Nations. It is blatantly illegal, it is blatantly dangerous, and anything done in this sense is very worrying, very troubling, and very destabilizing. And quite frankly, even if in Moscow they think that these approaches or this attitude of the American administration is not credible, the negative effects are already there. And unfortunately, one thing that we learn stubbornly in the decades that followed the Second World War is that every mistake, and if it's more serious, even more so, in geopolitics or in geostrategy, leaves indelible and endless marks. It causes injury that will never be healed. It will take a very long time to get over it. Even if the United States changes its attitude in the next coming weeks, it goes back to, let's say, an orthodox foreign policy, the effect of having rocked the boat of the transatlantic relation has profoundly shocked the allies in the West, and it's going to take a long time for them to understand that the United States will become again a reliable ally. The basis of any alliance is the reliability and the predictability of your ally. If you cannot rely on your ally and you cannot predict what your ally is going to be doing, the alliance is as good as dead.
Mr. Rad, it looks like reliability and predictability are rare commodities on the international stage these days. I would like to hear your reflections on this prospective mineral still that everybody is talking about. We understand the substantial majority of those rare earth minerals are actually located within the confines of Russia-controlled area of Ukraine. Those deposits are there. And we know that President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to sign something this Friday. He's going to be in the United States. I'm interested about the jurisdictional aspect of the story. We understand how Ukraine's sovereignty is being treated these days. It is being viewed very transactional from the perspective of President Trump and his administration. How will the jurisdictional aspect of that will be addressed, in bearing in mind the fact that those territories are currently under Russian control?
Well, I'll be very happy to address that issue very immediately, but allow me to make one prefatory observation. This is not a war for territory. That's not why Russia invaded Ukraine. It doesn't need more territory. It does not need more raw materials. Russia is the largest country in the world. Ukrainian territory would be 0.03% additional. That is not the point. The point is precisely what the ambassador mentioned most recently, which is to turn the world upside down and to run away from everything that was established in the last century. Going to your question about the mineral deal, we have to understand preliminarily that the document that has circulated as the one that presumably will be signed is an agreement to agree. There is very little there that is specific. It will come out, if it does at all, in another document. This is a framework for discussion, simply. On your question of jurisdiction, the focus of the raw material discussion is on Ukrainian government-owned resources. What is Ukrainian government-owned? Well, if there is any shred of international law remaining, then it is the entirety of Ukrainian territory. It includes the Crimean Peninsula. It includes the territorial waters of Ukraine and Ukraine's exclusive economic zone and the resources in the bed of the Black Sea, which is an area the size of South Korea. So that language being worded the way it is does not provide us any specific focus on the border right now in so many terms. But in the normal course, that's what it would include. But it is unfortunate that we have moved, every news media coverage has progressively moved further and further away of the main focus of what all of this is. We're talking about language, syllables, words, resources. That's not the point. We have a war of extermination and genocide against Ukrainians, articulated specifically in so many words since 2014. This is not a 3-year-old invasion. It's not a Ukrainian war. This is a Russian war against the existence of Ukraine. This is nothing new. It has been going on for centuries. For that reality, which goes to the essence of the United Nations, why it was formed before, what did everybody say? Never again after World War II? Russia today is saying, well, you just watch me. I will do it again. Precisely. And ultimately, it's coming down to a business deal. This is immoral, and the payment that the world will pay will be horrendous. The message to tyrants and dictators around the world, from China to Iran to Venezuela and other countries, North Korea, everybody is absolutely delighted that the train has been removed from one railroad track and placed on another railroad track and is going in an opposite direction from where we should go. But we still think we're on the correct train. This will be a disaster.
Ambassador Baklanov, I would like to hear your thoughts on the prospective minerals deal between Ukraine and United States. We have heard that there are some possible talks involving US and Russia as well about some of the deposits on the Ukrainian territory. And also perhaps in addition to answering that question, you could also tell us what you think. What does actually victory under the circumstances entail for Russia? Because Mr. Rutte, it's not about territory. Territorial component is not central. It's about actually Ukraine being sort of firmly within the realm of Russian influence in many ways. What victory is for Russia in the context of the current conflict? But before that, please tell us what you think about the minerals deal.
Well, let's differentiate two parts of the question. The first deals with the so-called mineral issue. Well, I think that this is a very big exaggeration and a very big deal of unprofessional talk about that because the real figures about the quantity and quality of the minerals that are on this spot, they are quite secretive matter. We didn't publish these materials, and the Ukrainians never published these materials. So this is, I think, I'm afraid that this is very inaccurate, forecast of the opportunities that in the final account, those who will come and excavate these minerals would have. So this is mainly the political issue without real substance. Okay, if the United States and President of America will go on with that, we have already prepared for that, and we have already given him assurances that if these lands eventually will be under our control, he will have no detriment, because we will easily make a deal with him on the same, approximately on the same conditions that he is planning to have with the Kiev government. So this issue doesn't seem to be very difficult if there is a real substance in it, as I reiterate. As far as our aim of the war or the war activities in Ukraine, we have given three prerequisites for the ending of these military activities. The first is demilitarization. It means that Ukraine will have no army and no foreign troops on its territory. The second, more difficult, as we call it, denazification. It means that the present day government and the entourage, all those people must go or maybe taken for custody, and we have already approximately 10,000 of legal cases against the majority of the leaders and the military leaders of Ukraine. So they must be taken for the account. And the third element is the overall radicalization in Ukraine, which is, of course, the matter of rather distant future.
And those three elements together cumulatively form the concept of Russian victory in your understanding, and you believe in the understanding of the Russian state. Understood. Ambassador Aristide, some extraordinary demands actually from the Russian side, but bearing in mind that these demands are extraordinary and it will be incredibly difficult to implement them on the ground, could we say that whatever will be attained in the meantime would be actually victory for Ukraine, because it cannot be victory for Russia?
I didn't get the third condition that the Ambassador Vaklanov said. Could you repeat that
Ambassador
again?
Vaklanov, could you please remind us of the third component of the Russian victory concept?
The third element is tranquilization, the return of the situation in Ukraine to normality when there is no danger for the Russians living there, for the Russian language, etc., etc., etc. We had a lot of complaints during a long period of time, and that was one of the main prerequisites for us to start this military operation. The situation in Ukraine in all its parts should return to what we call the normality.
So tranquilization or normalization?
Now we think that this is absolutely unnormal, and unless there will be major change in the situation, we go on insisting in our understanding of what will be the prevailing regime and the opportunities for the people living there.
Thank you. Ambassador Steger, let's hear from you.
I asked for a clarification because in my mind, the things that I've heard in this last intervention of Ambassador Baklanov are completely surreal, to put it mildly. It's exactly the same things that the Russians said before they invaded Ukraine. Nothing has changed after hundreds of thousands of deaths and 3 years of suffering in both countries. If the intelligentsia of Russia is insisting in not changing an iota, a comma, a single word of what they were demanding that were completely preposterous, ridiculous, surreal demands in the beginning of the war, I cannot see how is it possible that anybody in their right mind can make those same demands 3 years and hundreds of thousands of deaths later. Let's go part by part. If by tranquilization or going back to normality means that they are again putting into question the democracy in Ukraine and calling the leaders that have been elected freely by the Ukrainian people putschists, as they have been doing since 2014, saying, of course, that the Maidan revolt was, in fact, a coup d'etat. That's what they're saying. And I am seeing all of their spokespersons around the world, even in Spain or the United States, in France, in Italy, all the extremists from the left and the right saying exactly the same things, talking about a timeline that started God knows when, and saying that there is no difference between Ukraine and Russia, and that in fact the Ukrainian state has never existed. And all of these things in the propaganda that has been sinking into the psyche of some very, very extremist journalists in the United States and elsewhere. But let's go to the other two. Denazification, really? I mean, it's a democracy. Ukraine is a democracy. President Zelensky is a Jew. Can you really think that a Jew whose ancestors were victims of the Holocaust can in his right mind be a Nazi? Ambassador Baklanov in the previous program that we had a debate in accused Europe of being like in the 1940s, that all of us had become some kind of new version of the Nazi party. Let me tell you, Ambassador Baklanov, not a single government in the European Union today has anything to do with Nazism. And in fact, what we're trying to do is to defeat those extremists that are using a disguise to try to get into our institutions and that may have some kind of Nazi sympathies. And let me tell you one thing. Exactly those people, those political parties, those extremists are the allies of Russia in Europe. Those guys that are friendly to the Nazi ideology are your friends, not ours. And lastly, when you talk about the demilitarization of Ukraine, that is not for you to decide. That is for the Ukrainian people to decide. You can ask your friends, your new friends, the United States, to block the entry of Ukraine into NATO, because the United States will probably veto the entry of Ukraine into NATO. They need unanimity. But again, do you think that two impeccably, irreproachably democratic nations that have been neutral for decades, as Sweden or Finland, would change from neutrality to being allies of NATO just out of fun? They feel threatened by you. They feel threatened by Russia, as do the Baltic states. And Poland, that is building a new army, trying to be a match to any kind of aggression that comes from your country. And finally, one thing you have to understand, Russia or nobody will impose the Ukrainians or the Europeans a negotiation for Ukraine to join the European Union. And you will not be able to Finlandize Ukraine as you did with the Finns, because they defeated the Soviet Union in the war of 1939, from November of 39 to March of 1940. And the Soviet Union did not want a phenomenal adversary, as the Finns were, to be an ally of the West. And you imposed their neutrality. And this may not happen again. It would be a disaster for the world.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Aristegi. I'm given to understand that we're coming to an end, but Mr. Rad, let us, of course, you feel free to reflect on what you have heard, but also very, very briefly, our time is now very limited. I was bound to hear out Ambassador Aristegi's eloquent reply, but very briefly about what security guarantees for the time being would be good enough for Ukraine. We have literally 1 minute, really.
Russia was Hitler's ally in causing and creating World War II. So when they allege others are not, they should look at themselves first. In terms of security agreements or assurances, it should have been put in place in 1991, or at least in 2014, at the time of the invasion, the ritual invasion. And that is enough military capacity to prevent something like this from ever happening again. There must be war reparations. There has to be some accountability. Until Russia acknowledges its guilt before the world, as Nazi Germany did, there will be no change within Russia. The tradition of dictatorship will continue. We have to understand that. If there was any claim of territorial rights and the like, if Ukraine had the capacity, Ukraine should have invaded Russia, reclaimed territory, 50%, that has been occupied by Russia for a century, and recompense for the millions upon millions of innocent children and other victims in the course of Moscow's rule of Ukraine in the 20th century alone. Details on the security measures, it comes down to a question of hardware and political will by the Western allies.
Thank you very much indeed. Unless
Russia is and has been acknowledged by anybody who knows anything about Russian history as a master of invading and occupying a territory that's more important than geography, and it is the human brain, controlling, creating conditioned response, and that is what we are seeing with the reality reversal when we hear the ambassador talking right now of Russia's claims. Demand, accuse, and attack endlessly until your victim and your target capitulates because he no longer has the will to argue otherwise. That is the ultimate form of Russian mind control.
Well, thank you very much indeed to all of you. Unless Ambassador Baklanov would like to say something, we can resume.
Well, actually, I understand that unfortunately we are speaking different language and we have different logic. Well, for us, this is the liberation process, the liberation of Ukraine. We have 11 million of people, either Ukrainians or Ukrainian-related people, like my family. For us, it's quite easy. We must, return back to the situation we had in 50s and 60s when we have the friendships of different nations living on the territory of Ukraine. No more of this situation. The prevailing mood is absolutely professional. So for us, this is the necessity of returning back to the previous situation, which was characterized by the opportunity for all the people living and expressing themselves in the language they would like. And first of all, of course, the Russian language, which was practically prohibited during the last period of time. Our people were intimidated. So the so-called Ukrainian government must pay a price for these intimidations of our people during last 2 decades.
Well, thank you very much to all of you. Indeed, opinions differ, and on this particular occasion they differ violently. Well, thank you very much to all of you.
Let's say it vehemently.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Victor Rad, Ambassador Baklanov, Ambassador Arishtega, I'm grateful to all of you. Thank you. This was Victor Rad, board member of the Ukrainian-American Bar Association and chairman of the Committee of Foreign Affairs. Ambassador Andrei Baklanov, deputy head of the Association of Russian Diplomats, and Ambassador Gustavo de Aristegui, former Spanish diplomat and politician. We discussed the latest developments revolving around Ukraine, latest debate at the United Nations, both at the General Assembly and the Security Council, Prime Minister Keir Starmer's trip to the United States, the special relationship, and many other related matters. See you very soon indeed.